Good afternoon, A-pushers. I'm taking off to a speech meet today, and so I wanted to be sure to give you kind of a rundown of what we should be taking away from today's activities and assignments. You've gone through the Albert questions for period 6, and by period 6, I don't mean classroom 6, I mean period 6 on our timeline, 1877 to 1898, the Gilded Age. And so you're supposed to be going through the progress check there. We've gone through 2/3 of it together. You have that one remaining set of questions that deals with an excerpt, a quote from Rutherford B. Hayes, the president that really ends Reconstruction and begins the Gilded Age. And this particular passage deals with a system you've heard of, but by a different name. Okay. And so pay attention to the video on the death of James Garfield, another thing we're going to be covering today, when they talk about the spoils system, which you remember, that dates back to Andrew Jackson, who thought the best approach to hiring people for the civil service or jobs within the federal government was to hire people like you or that you liked, as opposed to hiring someone that is qualified. Better to have your own idiots in the position than somebody else's idiots, kind of thing. The spoils system, as we get into the 1770s, 1780s, becomes known as the patronage system. So take a look at that, or keep that in context as you read through those excerpts and as you listen to what happened to President James Garfield. Okay. The other thing that I wanted to talk about or point out is, as you're watching this video about the assassination of a U.S. president, is that he dies as a result of three factors. Okay. First of all, Charles Guiteau, which is the assassin, obviously fires a bullet. Second, from bacterial infection in the days before antibiotics or even basic hygiene. Sepsis is going to kill President Garfield 80 days after his initial wound. And then third of all, and this is important to our set of questions, what kills James Garfield is patronage. Okay, Guiteau, who was a madman, I mean, mental illness plays a big role in this as well, but Guiteau, after he shoots Garfield, shouts at the top of his lungs about how he is a stalwart of stalwarts. And what that is, the stalwarts were a faction of the Republican Party. Okay, we've talked about factionalism before, but the faction of the Republican Party that believed in patronage, believed in the spoils system, identified by the name of stalwarts. Okay, the other group that wanted to make changes to the government and bring about greater reform and add principles into hiring federal officials were known as the half-breeds. So the stalwarts versus the half-breeds, and when Guiteau shoots and kills President Garfield, he's raving mad about this patronage system and how he lost out on a federal job. He wanted to be the ambassador to some European country. He's raving about this as one of the reasons why he killed Garfield. Well, so what does that matter to us? It matters because this shines a big bright light on the fact that something needs to be done to get rid of this crony system, this idea of hiring people simply because they belong to your same party or they gave you money. There should be a system in place for hiring federal employees. And I'm not talking about presidential appointments like judges or cabinet members. I'm talking about federal positions of administration, secretaries, garbage men, Capitol Police, every figure that operates the city of Washington, D.C. depended on the patronage system. So with the death of Garfield, 3 years later, Congress passes the first civil service bill called the Pendleton Act to reform how these jobs are handled. It creates a system which requires you to go through an application process and to be reviewed by the civil service administrator. And it tries to clean up the corruption that was festering in the hiring of federal employees. So that is 1883, the Pendleton Act, as a result of the assassination of James Garfield. If you're like, I had no idea that there was another president other than Lincoln or John Kennedy assassinated. There's actually been 4 presidential assassinations in American history and a handful of other attempted assassinations. So we'll cover that down the road. But that's why we're going to start class watching a little bit of information about the assassination of Garfield, not the cat, the president. The other thing you're going to be looking at, speaking of happy stories, is an event known as the Haymarket Incident. It's known as the Haymarket Incident today because political correctness and not wanting to label one political set of values as preferable to another is something we care about today. But when it first happened, the Haymarket Incident was known as the Haymarket Riot, and it takes place in Chicago, Illinois, the home of the McCormick Reaper Company. Now, if you're ever out in the rural areas of Nebraska and you see red tractors, those red tractors are most likely produced by Case IH, the Case Company, which is one of the major farm machinery builders today. It actually has a long history back to the McCormick Company. So what was McCormick becomes the Case Company. At any rate, if you know of any of your grandparents that collect toy tractors, a lot of the McCormick antique toys are worth quite a bit of money. But McCormick competed with John Deere, and McCormick's claim to fame was an automated reaper, which is a machine that cuts the wheat down at the end of after the growing season is done for harvest. You know, a reaper cuts grain for harvest, and this mechanical reaper was their big claim to fame, like the steel plow was John Deere's. So the McCormick factory had been the victim, as many factories were, of a labor protest, a union labor protest, and police were sent out, and ultimately the police shot and killed 3 laborers at the McCormick factory. And so this Haymarket incident happens in the same week. Members of the Knights of Labor had gathered in this kind of open air plaza to complain about the establishment and how government protected business owners and, you know, the consequences of laissez-faire capitalism, and listen to speeches. And one of the speeches was given by an anarchist. This anarchist gets up and his focus is on complete overhaul of the system. Now, this time we're going to see that anarchism and communism and socialism, these ideas come to North America with European immigrants. You'll also notice a lot of people have beards. Beards, very important and popular during the later part of the 19th century, starting with President Lincoln. But young men wearing beards, as kind of a fashion statement, causing chaos surrounding ideas about communism and anarchism and that type of thing, is why we don't see a lot of bearded presidents or politicians at all today, because it starts to be associated with anti-Americanism. You know, we in America have this feeling that you own your property and you can do whatever you want with your property, and business owners should be protected and to be able to make decisions like what to pay their employees and what benefits to offer, whether to offer health care or retirement and that type of thing. Well, these union workers, like the Knights of Labor and socialists and communists and anarchists, are saying, you know what about the ownership of labor? People own their own sweat. They own their own ability to work or not work. And just like we're seeing companies come together and create monopolies and pools and trusts, why can't workers come together to form labor unions? And that was a really kind of un-American idea. And so crackdowns on those kinds of ideas and their associations with acts of violence on the workers' part really get played up in the media. Anyway, back to Haymarket. Listening to these speeches from anarchists and socialists and union leaders, at the end of the night, the governor decides that's enough. The rhetoric is too violent, and he orders the cops to put the protests down. And in the effort to turn the crowds out, someone throws a bomb, and you're going to see the bomb. It looks like something right out of a cartoon because it's one of those bowling ball with a lighted wick bombs. Those are real things, by the way. Somebody throws a bomb and it kills. Well, it doesn't necessarily kill 3 police officers, but 3 police officers die in the ensuing chaos. Anarchists, socialists, union labor leaders are blamed for this riot and this massacre of police forces, although it's really unclear who was responsible. You'll see the details. 8 people are scooped up and prosecuted, not for their guilt in the murders per se, but in their guilt by association to this cause of socialism and anarchism. They're put on trial. It's international news. And of the 8, 4 men are summarily executed very quickly. Labor disputes and things continue on in the years after the Haymarket incident, and ultimately the governor of Illinois commutes the sentences of 3 of the men who were awaiting execution. The 4th killed himself with a cigar bomb. I don't know how you make a cigar bomb, but that was his fate. It sounds ridiculous, but so of the 8 people that were arrested, 5 of them die in the custody of the government, and 3 are exonerated, released, and go on to be labor leaders. So why does this matter? It matters because what we're looking at here with our activities is how laissez-faire capitalism has a consequence. It has a consequence in the creation of the labor movement, and we'll talk about the early unions and their activity and what their focused accomplishments would be, like an 8-hour work week and overtime pay and a limited number of days, working days a week. So the very first federal holiday that's recognized as a day off is Labor Day. So we'll look at the consequences of the labor movement in addition to this, but there are several very important moments in the 1880s where riots and protests and the government's response to those make a big difference in changing the nation from one that has unrestricted capitalism to one where the government starts to get involved. And that's a slow process because it's going to take Teddy Roosevelt, the great trust buster, and the age of progressivism to really address the excesses of capitalism. But it's also the reason that we don't see a lot of men wearing beards in politics. Yes, they're scratchy and not the most sanitary kind of thing, but really it's because they become associated with Karl Marx, socialism, European immigrants, and anti-American activity. So go and watch these videos, finish your Albert, and enjoy your weekend. We will be wrapping up chapter 25 next week. I would expect that we'll have a test towards the end of the week. Catch you later. Bye.